位。testing 試咪夠唔夠清楚？請問 testing。試咪，收得清楚好，唔該。
試咪。testing。
試咪。
我試緊，唔好意思啊。可以繼續。
係試咪。
呢支係 MC 咪試緊。MC 咪 OK 嘛？試咪。好，咁記招正式開始啊！首先好多謝咁多位記者今日出席第22次民間記者會。今日嘅主題係香港非典型人道危機。咁今日有4個環節嘅，分別係中英文發言人、嘉賓分享、中英文總結同埋問答環節。我哋再一次感謝基進報導提供手語傳譯員。Thank you very much for attending the 22nd Citizens Press Conference today. A very warm welcome from us here. Our theme today is The Hero, Tears, and Humanitarian Crisis Behind Masks. The conference will be divided into 4 parts. We'll begin with the Chinese and English speeches, followed by 2 sharing sections by our guest speakers, and we'll finish up with conclusion and Q&A section. We'd like to thank Radical Hong Kong again for sending in their sign language interpreter. 咁開始之前，我哋請台上面嘅發言人企起身俾記者影相先。係發言人可以望中間先，係望一望左邊，再望一望右邊。咁喺記招開始之前呢，因為今日就係11月1號啦，係10月1號荃灣開槍事件1個月。直至到而家呢，嗰個警員仍然係冇受到任何懲罰。我哋唔希望大家遺忘呢個日子，所以有請台上面嘅嘉賓而家靜默30秒。好，靜默時間結束。麻煩咁多位發言人可以先就座。首先係有請文記嘅中文發言人首先發言。
試咪。反修例運動踏入第5個月，香港人持續承受住唔同程度嘅非人道暴力，警權無限放大，黑警無差別濫捕。驅趕時候嚴重濫捕，令到唔少街坊途人無辜受傷，被捕人士喺警署受到酷刑對待。另一方面，新聞報導、社交媒體上面無間斷嘅警暴畫面，以至到紀律部隊同埋公共醫療系統信任崩壞所帶嚟嘅無力感等等，都令到社會大眾長期精神受壓、精神緊張、人心惶惶，唔少人嘅精神狀態瀕臨崩潰。民間記者會喺10月28號到29號期間進行咗有關抗爭者精神健康嘅民間研究。問卷主要收集喺受訪者之間所出現嘅抑鬱、焦慮同埋壓力症狀。民研結果發現，有多於30%嘅受訪者出現各種程度嘅創傷壓力後遺症症狀，揭示香港人精神狀態已經響起警號，急需要大眾同埋國際關注。喺講解問卷重點部分之前，我哋先公布最新一次受訪者對於林鄭政府、警隊同埋司法制度嘅評分。政府0.14，警隊0.06，司法1.34，全線繼續插水，尤其係警隊嘅評分。至於受訪者對於抗爭理念嘅認同程度就持續高企，5大訴求缺一不可，喺5分入面攞到4.76分。兄弟爬山各自努力攞到4.74分，不指責 不割席、不篤灰，喺5分入面就攞到4.81分，可以見到抗爭者依然堅守信念。接下嚟係有關精神健康部分嘅詳細數據，文記嘅研究團隊成員將會為大家解讀數據，在場記者都可以同時參照手上嘅研究數據。
試咪。民間記者會嘅研究團隊於10月28號晚上9時到10月29號晚上9時進行咗一個為期24小時嘅網上問卷調查，共有43,681人受訪。是次問卷嘅主題係精神健康。我哋採用咗幾份國際心理學研究常用嘅量表，包括 Depression Anxiety Stress Scale DASS-21、Satisfaction with Life Scale SWLS，以及 PTSD Checklist for DSM-5、PCL-5，去分別量度受訪者嘅抑鬱、焦慮、壓力、生活滿意度以及創傷後壓力症狀。每個症狀都有一個國際認可嘅臨界指標。當受訪者嘅分數超過呢個指標，就代表受到顯著症狀嘅困擾，並需要進一步嘅臨床診斷同埋心理治療。一般診斷過程需要由相關有專業如心理學家啦，或者精神科醫生啦，對患者進行一系列面對面嘅訪談去做嘅。所以以上嘅量表只係為受訪者嘅精神狀態提供一個參考。我哋呼籲所有因情緒問題而導致生活有所影響嘅人士，向有關專業尋求幫助同埋治療㗎。喺43,000幾名受訪者當中啦，有16.4% 嘅人呢係超過咗抑鬱症狀嘅臨界指標嘅，而喺8月18號嘅我哋嘅數據係只有12.7%，有26.7% 嘅人呢係超過咗焦慮嘅指標，而我哋喺8月18號嘅數據只有24.3%，7.7% 嘅人呢係超過咗壓力嘅指標，而我哋8月中嘅數據只有7.2%。所以無論係焦慮嘅症狀啦，或者係抑鬱嘅症狀，都有明顯嘅增長㗎。生活滿意度方面啦，有15.5% 嘅人呢係對自己生活感到極端嘅唔滿意，而我哋8月中嘅數據只有11%。事實上，眾所周知，香港人嘅精神同埋心理壓力一直處於高位㗎。根據聯合國嘅 World Happiness Report， 香港喺156個地區當中只係排名第76位。香港大學亦於7月份公佈咗一項包括咗1000幾名嘅受訪者嘅追蹤研究嘅結果，發現有住顯著嘅抑鬱症狀嘅受訪者比例達到9.1%，相對於2014年佔中嘅5.3% 係有顯著嘅增幅㗎。另一項可以攞嚟做比較嘅研究係由香港遊樂場協會進行嘅香港青少年生活狀況調查2018，當中佢哋訪問咗3000幾名青少年，發現分別有2.9% 啦、11% 啦，以及6.2% 嘅受訪者出現顯著嘅壓力啦、焦慮同埋抑鬱症狀。而近日中文大學亦都公佈咗一項有關精神健康嘅調查，發現大約有1000名嘅受訪者裏面，有41% 受訪者表示精神健康因近日社會動盪而變差㗎。而2018年有呢一個感受嘅人只有18%。所以相比之下呢，可以見到我哋現時嘅受訪者呢一個調查嘅受訪者有精神健康問題嘅情況係相當普遍，受訪者有抑鬱啦、焦慮、壓力等等問題嘅比例都係相當之高，需要精神健康專業支援嘅人數係相當多嘅。有見及我哋曾經喺8月18號進行嘅精神健康研究，發現有較高嘅比例嘅受訪者出現抑鬱啦、焦慮等等症狀，而至今市民經歷同埋目睹嘅警暴只係越嚟越嚴重。所以我哋喺今次嘅研究特別增加咗量度受訪者創傷後壓力症狀嘅問題。創傷性壓力症狀係講緊一啲因為經歷啦，或者目睹嚴重重大嘅創傷事件，講緊例如性侵啦、血腥嘅襲擊等等而出現嘅心理壓力症狀。呢啲症狀包括回閃，我所講 flashbacks、發惡夢啦、不能入睡、焦慮、精神唔集中，甚至乎有失憶、有自殺傾向等等。一直以嚟，本地研究創傷後壓力症狀都係針對一啲嚴重嘅天災或者意外，例如嘉利大廈大火啦、沙士啦、 以及個別性侵、家暴或者目睹家人離世嘅經歷等等。較少研究係試過探討警暴而嚟嘅心理狀況㗎。今次我哋嘅研究特別調查因警暴或者警黑所引致嘅創傷性事件，包括警方或者黑社會無差別嘅攻擊啦、橡膠子彈啦、海綿彈啦、實彈，以及警方嘅性暴力或者肢體暴力。眼見抗爭運動已經持續咗4個幾月啦，然而政權施予人民嘅暴力冇減退嘅跡象。我哋用咗一個比較嚴謹嘅國際性標準去界別出有顯著創傷後壓力症狀嘅受訪者。我哋嘅調查發現有37% 嘅人，即係每3位嘅受訪者當中就有1位有住顯著嘅創傷後壓力症狀。而經歷或者目睹2件以上創傷性事件嘅人士裏面，壓力症狀嘅比例更高達55%。前線勇武手足需要直接咁面對警方嘅肢體暴力啦、言語暴力啦、濫暴甚至乎性暴力。喺抗爭嘅日子裏面，佢哋不斷目睹同埋經歷創傷性事件，隨之而來嘅壓力啦同傷害只有不斷增加，甚至乎出現利搭利嘅情況。即使係和理非，佢哋都無可避免咁樣活喺無止境嘅恐懼裏面。好多人都有屋企人或者朋友遇上不同程度嘅暴力事件。而魔警多次喺民居濫捕，亦都係甚至乎影響一般人，甚至乎非抗爭者嘅日常生活。屯門近日泄漏催淚氣體啦，強闖健身事件都係鮮明嘅例子。一切都令人重新評估究竟香港係咪一個安全嘅家呢？究竟自己遇上不測嘅時候，有冇人可以幫到自己呢？創傷性事件帶嚟創傷嘅其中一個主因，係因為呢啲事件從根本上顛覆咗人嘅世界觀，世界唔再安全，世界唔再公平。呢一方面嘅影響遠比起肉眼睇到嘅傷患更加令人絕望，對社會嘅影響更加深遠。反送中嘅抗爭裡面嘅創傷後壓力狀況係好特殊嘅，同天災或者沙士唔同。我哋見到嘅暴力有明確嘅原因，抗爭中嘅創傷並唔係不幸，而係政權縱容嘅惡果。抗爭亦都有持續性嘅，同一般嚴重意外狀況唔同。心理學上視呢一種不間斷嘅危險，甚至乎重複遇上創傷事件嘅慘況為長期精神創傷 （chronic traumatic stress）。由此可以想像，相比起一次性嘅創傷事件，前線抗爭者每次上街冒住濫捕啦、警暴嘅危險，甚或乎目睹或者經歷有關嘅傷痛事件，一個舊傷患未好，另一個新傷患已經產生咗啦。而每一次遇上一件創傷事件，不單止勾起上一件創傷事件嘅慘痛回憶，更會令人對身邊所有事情變得敏感。即使風暴過去咗，腦袋裡面嘅一個個不能磨滅嘅傷痕有。國際研究顯示，創傷後壓力症對於日常生活嘅影響係終身嘅。政權不但只以肢體暴力傷害咗市民，更加以精神暴力令市民萬劫不復。聯合國減災風險辦公室 UNDRR 定義災難係由危險事件嘅發生啦、脆弱性、應付能力嘅互相作用底下，導致任何規模嘅社區或者社會功能被嚴重打亂，引致以下一種或多種嘅情況：人類啦、物質、經濟同埋環境嘅損失同埋影響。香港現時出現嘅人道危機係十分明顯，各種警黑嘅暴力啦、濫暴啦等等，令香港人生活得不再安全。即使數據顯示大部分人嘅抗爭理念並冇減退，更加係持續高企，但係政權暴力而嚟嘅精神健康禍害亦都係相當明顯嘅。除咗看得見嘅傷口，由今次研究我哋見到更加嚴重、廣泛而且影響深遠，但係無形嘅心理傷口。今日民間記者會除咗發佈以上報告之外，亦都邀請咗3位嘉賓發言，分別係民間支援網絡嘅2位代表，以及因警方濫權濫捕及醫護白色恐怖導致精神受創嘅受害者。稍後我哋亦都會探討警暴報告，並公佈搜集得嚟嘅地下醫療數據。接落嚟係英文發言。
Testing. In the past 5 months of resistance, Hong Kongers have been suffering from inhumane brutality in all forms and every degree. both to bodily and our psychic. The infinite expansion of the statutory powers of the police, arbitrary arrest of protesters and local likes, injuries sustained in struggle against arbitrary arrests, fear of tortures after arrest, all serve to place the public under constant threats. With law enforcement and the healthcare system both rotten to the core, Hong Kongers feel helpless and, as a society, are on the verge of the collective mental breakdown. From the 28th to the 29th of October, the Citizens' Press Conference conducted a study regarding the mental health of protesters. The questionnaire mostly collected information regarding respondents' symptoms of depression, anxiety, and stress. Our study results show that more than 30% of participants have exhibit symptoms of varying degrees of post-traumatic stress disorder, or namely PTSD, revealing an alarming decline in mental health in Hong Kong, urgently in need of local and international attention. Before bringing in the key findings of our survey, we would like to first present the latest statistics on public trust in the current government, the police force, and the judicial system. The government received a score of 0.14, for the police force 0.06, and the judiciary 1.34. All tragically flat on their backs. Let's see if the score for the police force would go underground next time. I'm betting my dinner. As for the score indicating agreement towards the protest movement's stated principle and philosophies, they have continued to soar. 5 demands and not one less has received a score of 4.76 out of 5. Everyone is climbing their own side of mountain to get to the same summit, was given a score of 4.74 out of 5. And for no diversion, no division, no denunciation is 4.81 out of 5. We are hanging firmly in Verful Shore. The research team of Citizen Press Conference conducted an online survey within the standard 24-hour time frame between 9 p.m. on the 28th of October and 9 p.m. on the 29th of October, and received a total of 43,681 responses. Adaptation of numerous universally adopted assessment tools internationally used in psychological research, such as Depression Anxiety Stress Scale, DASS-21, the Satisfaction with Life Scale, SWLS, and the PTSD checklist for DSM-5, PCL-5, were deployed to measure the respondents' symptoms of depression, anxiety, stress, low life satisfactions, and potential PTSD. Each scale has an intentionally recognized threshold, above which the test taker is recommended to seek further clinical assessment and treatment. A formal clinical diagnosis cannot be made without a series of direct face-to-face investigation by professional psychiatrists or clinical psychologists. And so the adapted assessment tool used in our survey provide only a reference. We would urge that all individuals whose lives are being affected by mental health struggles of any form to seek professional help as soon as possible. Out of 43,000 study participants, 16.4% have exceeded the threshold measure for depression, 26.7% have exceeded the threshold of measures for anxiety, 7.7% have exceeded the threshold measure for stressfulness. For both anxiety and depression, symptoms have shown a significant increase. In fact, Hong Kongers have always been known to have shown of holding high degree of psychological threats. According to the World Happiness Report by the United Nations, out of 156 locations, Hong Kong was placed the 76th. In July, the University of Hong Kong published a psychological study that followed over 1,000 study participants. The report indicates that 9.1% of the study participants demonstrated symptoms of significant depressions, a clear increase over the figure of 5.3 from the same study in 2014. Another relevant study is the 2018 study of life situation and mental well-being of youth in Hong Kong by the Hong Kong Playground Association, where over 3,000 youth in Hong Kong were interviewed. The report showed that, respectively, 2.9%, 11.1%, and 6.2% of the interviewees displayed signs of stress, anxiety, and depression. More recently, the Chinese University of Hong Kong also released a study on mental health, showing that out of the 1,000 interviewees, 41% indicated that the mental well-being was negatively affected by the recent social situations, whereas the same figures was 18% in 2018. Concluding from the result of various studies, it is apparent that mental health issues are becoming more widespread. The proportion of interviewees who display signs of depression, anxiety, and stress is significant, and considerable amount of people show signs of being in need of professional mental health support. From the pilot mental health survey we conducted on the 18th of August, we observed that a high proportion of survey participants display symptoms of depression and anxiety, and etc. In view of the ever-escalating police brutality and civilians being thus increasingly exposed to both virtual and physical dangers, we decided to use our October survey to also study the symptom of PTSD. PTSD is an anxiety disorder that entails persistent symptoms on victims who have borne witness or have experienced severely stressful, frightening, or distressing events, such as sexual assault or violent attack. These symptoms include flashback, insomnia, nightmares, anxiety, difficulty concentrating, even memory loss, and suicidal tendencies. Prior research on PTSD in Hong Kong has mostly focused on natural disasters or accidents, such as the Gali building fire, SARS, individual experience of sexual assault, domestic violence or death. Very few within academia have explored police brutality as a trigger. This current study places special emphasis on police misconduct or violence-induced PTSD episode triggered by indiscriminate police or gang attacks, experiences with rubber bullets, sponge grenade, live ammunition, and sexual and bodily violence committed by the police. Considering that the regime's rule by terror had not subsided after 4 months of civil resistance, we used a stricter international standard to identify those who display a marked number of PTSD symptoms in our survey. What we have found is that surprisingly 37% of respondents show significant symptoms of PTSD, and that the percentage of respondents who have witnessed or experienced more than 2 traumatic incidents even reached 55%. Frontliners are subject to direct violence from police brutality in physical, verbal, and even sexual form. Throughout the movement, the ever-increasing and ever more horrifying events they have witnessed and experienced firsthand have caused them ever-increasing pressure and harm. Even pacifist protesters are living in a constant state of fear, as the friends and family experience violence incidents. Repeated incidents of the Hong Kong police force marking arbitrary and violent arrests in residential estate has also seriously affected civilians, including non-protesters. Stark examples include the leakage of tear gas in Two Moon and the police forcing their way into Kin Sang estate. Every one of these incidents remind us to ask ourselves, is Hong Kong still a safe home for us? When unfortunate incidents happen to you, will you be able to find help? Distressing events are distressing because they overturn the assumption we had about a world that is used to be safe, fair, and just, and this distress goes far beyond what the eyes can see, but cuts much deeper, breeding widespread despair and hopelessness. The state of psychological distress caused by the social turmoil today is unique and unlike anything we have seen before, be it natural disasters or even SARS epidemic. The reason that this crisis is unique is because the deep pain we have witnessed is not the product of unfortunate external circumstances.
選民登記冊有17間公司，以建築、建設、投資等為名。不過佢哋全部係體育界登記選民。呢啲公司同體育界有咩關聯呢？原來佢哋全部都係由現任選委、香港乒乓總會主席、港協暨奧委會副會長余國良同埋佢嘅家人所持有。
余生你轄下有10幾間公司都係註冊咗做登記選民嘅。
我暫時要揾多啲資料先至再能夠答你啲問題嚇。
邊方面嘅資料啊？其實
好意思啊，我亦都開緊會。
作為醫生，呢個假普選通過咗就千秋萬世，呢個超高嘅門檻過咗之後，唔單止個後果，
我寧願即係被打被鬧嘅人係我咯，而佢哋唔會咁面臨呢啲咁樣嘅被警方咁暴力嘅對待咯。我自己會諗好多嘢㗎，會不斷地去諗好多唔同嘅可能性，同埋一啲負面嘅情緒等等啦。其實我呢一排我自己都有啲好情緒低落嘅時候，就係知道前幾日係831嘅2個月啦嚇，咁都有同朋友去討論過，因為當時即係網上呢排都有有啲嘅話題都話啦，見到靈體等等嘅情況啦嚇，我自己都有去翻查翻啲咁嘅資料，都有去同唔同嘅人去傾翻，其實自己又會勾翻起呢啲咁樣大時大節發生嘅嚴重嘅事，我自己個人就好 down，係放空，諗好多唔同嘅嘢，我好擔心自己會再係好似當日6月頭咁樣被拘捕或者被受傷，甚至乎而家嘅被消失、被自殺等等嘅傳聞。其實呢啲發夢嘅情緒，呢啲咁嘅時候呢，係我6、7月嘅時候好多嘅，而家呢排就緩和咗好多。咁可能係因為不斷地去同人傾談啦。其實你對於我自己工作上面呢，我寧願係唔會韞喺自己喺屋企咯，因為被捕嘅時候已經韞夠啦。我唔想喺一個室內嘅空間咁長嘅時間，我寧願去出多啲街，或者我工作嘅係不斷用工作去分散我嘅注意力，令到我唔可以去即係唔會再記得翻當時嘅咁慘嘅情況咯。其實我周不時都會去，即係我都會睇新聞，同埋會留意一啲嘅網上嘅討論區或者一啲唔同嘅頻道，去得到一啲新聞資訊。每個人都會同我講話，叫我離開呢啲遠離呢嘅新聞，其實係好難做到，即係可以暫時去離開，但係你會不斷地去跟進翻每一日發生緊啲咩事。咁但係咁樣嘅時候，面臨嘅就係要一啲嘅情緒嘅抗壓啦。我自己係我相信係我自己係而家係比當時嘅好嘅，冇咁大嘅情緒低落咯。都可以再講下另外一件嘅事情嘅，關於自己係有自殺嘅念頭咧。嗰次就好大件事，係因為我住喺我嘅嗰度嘅隔離啦嚇，某地區嘅有位男手足咧就跳樓輕生咗嘅。咁當時我自己係暴喊之餘咧，係好想自殺嘅。咁當時我就喺一個嘅群組入邊有同人透露過自己有咁嘅情緒。咁我嗰陣時就有人不斷打俾我啦，我唔選擇聽，但係最後係我選擇去聽啦，因為睇到個信息就見到嘅係大家頂住，大家要齊上齊落。咁我就聽翻呢個電話，咁然之後就叫我落去樓下街坊。咁都好開心嘅係當時有一紮街坊出現咗，去同我做翻啲心理支援，去同我傾翻梳理翻我嘅情緒。咁我自己之後再冇呢啲咁樣嘅想自殺嘅念頭咯。咁其實最後都想去講翻一個醫療體系嘅嗰方面嘅，我自己覺得直到現時為止，我自己對於醫護嘅體系咧係十分之存疑，同埋表示十分之憤怒。因為喺我呢件事之後，有人受傷去醫院嘅時候，都會無故地被醫護人員地去透露咗，然之後繼而可能面臨被捕或者 嗰一啲質問嘅情況出現嘅。其實醫者父母心，醫護人員係應該要去保障呢啲嘅傷者、呢啲受傷嘅人，而唔係要因為佢自己嘅所謂嘅意見同我哋唔一樣，而去不斷地去煽風點火，去喺度無聲作浪咯。呢樣嘢係我十分之憤怒，然之後會令到一啲無辜嘅人去被冠上一個可能係暴徒或者係一啲唔好嘅身份，而要去無故地去被警方拘捕。咁其實先唔好講話受傷者關唔關示威者事啊？大家睇新聞都知道呢排係行過路過跑步嘅都會俾人被捕。唔好講話點樣啦，途人路過好似琴晚咁，有人放工路過都俾呢個嘅催淚彈擊中背脊，但係佢自己都唔願地去睇醫生。其實成件事係十分之荒謬嘅。點解我哋受傷唔係因為唔係去醫院，而係要驚去醫院？成件事係十分之講唔通咯。但係都我覺得係比較鼓舞嘅係喺我件事之後，有好多唔同嘅民間嘅自發團體都會去幫助一啲嘅因為可能參與集會受傷嘅一啲嘅市民，或者無故受傷嘅市民等等，佢哋都會即時提供一啲醫療嘅援助，以免大家驚，即係消除大家去醫院嘅呢個嘅疑慮。咁最後我都想講翻嘅係我希望政府佢冇換湯唔換藥咯，要歸根究底去根治翻成件事嘅問題啊。其實成件事嘅問題係佢哋唔回應訴求，不斷地去造就警權過大，令到警權過大更而製造嘅係令到唔好意思，有好多嘅政府部門要去護航，要去幫手去配合去同氣連枝咁樣，將一啲唔係真相嘅嘢變做一啲嘅假嘅嘢咁樣咯，點樣去蓋過去咁樣咯。其實呢個白色恐怖係不斷地去籠罩住嘅。咁都早前知道咗就住一啲嘅醫院嘅投訴啦，咁醫管局都出翻咗一個獨立調查報告，話喺某一日冇任何嘅醫護人員去曾經透露過嘅。其實成件事對於我哋呢啲受害人，我覺得係一個好敷衍同埋一個好唔真誠嘅一個嘅回應啦。我好希望政府同埋醫管局真真正正去處理呢個問題啊，同埋我希望嘅係大家就算係唔相信去睇醫生都好，都希望如果受傷嘅都一定要去揾一啲民間救援團體去療傷。多謝。
Testing, and I will now give a brief short summary of what the guest said. Our guest described how he suffered from the perpetual state of anxiety after his arrest near the beginning of the resistance movement, and his constant battle with emotional breakdowns, nightmares, and the inability to focus at work throughout July when his mental health was at rock bottom. He admitted that suicidal thought came afore on 23rd of July when a fellow protester jumped off a nearby building in his neighborhood. His co-worker suggested that he takes a break from work, but he saw work as a means to distract himself from the intrusive thoughts that plagued his mind. He refrained from seeing a psychiatrist as he thought that it would have been an overreaction. But he was in regular touch with a friend of his who worked as a social worker, and his mental health began to recover towards the end of September. However, what happened on the 1st of October plunged his back to the depth. Discussions with the co-workers over rumored deaths at the Prince Edward terrorist attack has also sparked an episode of low mood last week. At the moment, his distress mainly comes from seeing scenes from police brutality on the internet and on TV, and from the hopelessness he feels towards the protests of the resistance movement, of the prospect of the resistance movement. He also remarked that it is ridiculous how even normal civilians going to hospital for treatment are at risk of being arbitrarily arrested, let alone the injured protesters who come to us. Yet, he is glad that There are now citizen-led medical teams around whom people feel safe seeing. Still, he is fundamentally concerned that the police are now granted this absolute power and all our government department has to serve them now, that there will be only be more victims of indiscriminate arrest, and that white terror will only intensify.
咁多位你哋好啦，我哋係一個民間嘅自發組織啦。咁我哋嘅成員參與過一次大型嘅搜救行動，當時喺 Telegram 我哋開咗個 group 交換即時嘅資訊。嗰次行動完咗之後，大家都決定正式成為一個團隊，希望繼續阻止呢啲悲劇嘅發生。政府嘅唔公義同埋警察濫捕嘅情況日益嚴重。出現絕望而需要情緒支援嘅個案多不勝數。我哋一班有搜救經驗嘅義工同埋義務社工，除咗平日透過網上平台支援情緒有需要嘅手足，亦都會喺有需要嘅時候開放平台，動員各區嘅市民協助進行搜救。咁我係呢個 Telegram 平台嘅 admin 啦，我主要嘅工作係負責收報料同埋聯絡嘅工作，但亦都會出去進行搜救嘅。由7月初開始至今，我哋已經處理超過500單嘅個案，當中有30% 係有即時危機，例如係危坐天台啦、想跳海或者自殘嘅。當中更會有人會留下遺書，控訴政府嘅唔公義，只希望換來政府嘅一個回應。有50% 係冇即時危機，但佢哋都曾經表示自己感到絕望，有尋死嘅諗法。有5% 嘅人係表示情緒受困擾，想揾人傾訴。而有15% 嘅係有其他支援需要，例如被捕支援、失蹤或者失聯嘅。我哋接觸到嘅個案年齡層好闊，主要以11至24歲年青人為主，年齡最高可以去到50歲添。一般求助信息都係集中喺大型示威後嘅1至2日。我哋高峰期更加一日收到高達10個求助個案，4個月入邊甚至有約10個個案唔止一次嘗試自殺，其中仲高達4至5次。可以見佢哋情緒其實長期係受困擾㗎。想講一個人要放棄生命，從來唔係容易嘅事嚟嘅。當中有80%人想輕生嘅主因，都係難以睇到呢個暴力嘅政權下邊嘅將來，選擇以死相間。另一個原因係同屋企人政見不合，受到莫大嘅精神壓力而離家出走，又或者俾人趕出屋企。少數係牽涉有關感情問題、朋輩關係或者經濟問題嘅。另外，我哋都收到唔少關於失聯或者失蹤嘅個案，其中一單印象最深刻嘅係有失蹤手足嘅屋企人啦，用盡所有方法都冇辦法聯絡到佢。屋企人聯絡我哋嘅時候，佢哋係非常無助㗎。佢哋曾經去報案錄取口供，但係竟然係遭受警方敷衍嘅對待同埋拖延。一個執法機關唔執法，我哋作為民間自發組織，亦只能夠根據當時嘅資料去盡力尋找呢個手足，同埋由社工支援屋企人同朋友嘅情緒。接案嘅警察由頭到尾都冇任何跟進，直至最後我哋發現事主係俾內地扣留咗，都係由社工陪住屋企人，直至事主平安返到屋企。政府如此漠視生命，我等仲能感到可悲同埋憤怒。失蹤人口其實一直以嚟都係由警察部門處理嘅，但係因為佢哋嘅無能，同埋加上而家好多懷疑被自殺嘅個案，唔少市民選擇相信嘅係民間自發組織，都唔會相信佢哋。更重要嘅係，因為呢幾個月警察濫權濫捕嘅情況，令求助者唔能夠再相信警察可以公平一致對待所有市民。 所以佢哋寧願靠自己嘅微細力量，靠蒙面嘅手足，靠見唔到真人嘅網上平台，去尋找佢哋珍貴唯一嘅親人同朋友。
史咪，我係呢個平台嘅其中一位義務社工。我係9月2號加入呢個嘅救援隊伍。喺當日嘅下晝，其實開始咧已經有企貼嘅個案咧，係由呢個民間嘅組織去自發救援嘅。去到9月3號嘅凌晨，大約3點鐘，同一時間係出現咗4至5宗嘅失蹤或者尋死個案。當時咧，我哋係冇辦法聯絡到所有嘅地區嘅外展隊啦。即使最後聯絡到一間通宵運作而係可以出車嘅社工隊伍，佢哋都因為已經有緊急嘅個案跟進緊，所以冇辦法出車協助。所以就算有啲民眾係可以揾到尋死嘅當事人，當下佢哋亦都冇得到足夠嘅支援。就算受過訓練嘅社工去到事發現場，喺面對一條人命嘅時候，仍然會感到無比嘅壓力。普通市民抵達現場面對嘅壓力更加係難以想像嘅。當日凌晨5點幾，啱啱處理完一宗危在天台嘅個案，我哋好快又接到市民嘅求助。事源呢係一位青少年啦，佢喺河旁度尋死。結果呢，有2名嘅自發市民呢揾到佢，佢哋一直都同我哋保持聯絡啦。佢哋表示好不知所措，希望可以快啲有人去到支援。喺我哋去到現場之後呢，我哋接觸咗一個10幾歲嘅青年，係一個中學生嚟嘅。佢經過幾個小時嘅陪伴之後呢，我哋先至開始了解到佢尋死嘅原因。佢係一個抗爭者，佢幾乎出席晒所有嘅抗爭。慢慢佢識咗其他嘅手足，組成咗一個隊伍。不幸嘅係佢有個隊友係俾人拘捕咗。而喺被捕之後48小時仍然聯絡唔到，成個人失咗蹤。佢感到非常之無力，亦都好憤怒，矛頭直指住警察同埋林鄭。佢直言佢想同警察攬炒，喺自殺之前要為佢嘅隊友報仇。佢冇辦法確認佢嘅隊友已經死亡，但係因為種種嘅跡象，而警方亦都冇提供足夠有力嘅證據去澄清。所以佢係深信佢嘅隊友係俾警察打死咗嘅。同時呢，佢係唔願意翻屋企嘅，因為佢嘅政見唔同，佢同屋企人已經產生咗嘅衝突。佢要等到屋企人都已經離開咗屋企，翻晒工啦，佢先願意翻屋企。佢亦都將佢嘅錢全部貢獻喺社運上面。屋企人唔再為佢提供生活嘅保障。佢只能夠依靠借錢同埋向有心人尋求資助去度日。喺幾名社工嘅陪伴底下，佢慢慢冷靜咗落嚟，由社工送咗佢翻屋企。屋企人仲未將佢趕出門口，呢樣嘢係咪我哋值得慶幸嘅事呢？一個年青人喺多方面受到巨大嘅壓力而尋死，呢樣係咪一個正常社會會發生嘅事呢？以上呢個個案只係冰山一角，但係已經可以帶到我哋幾個訊息出嚟。第一，喺呢個社會嘅狀況，市民嘅堅持同埋訴求，從來都未得到政府正面嘅回應，無力感不斷加重，最終導致壓力爆煲。第二，政府製造咗一個唔安全嘅環境俾廣大嘅市民，警察隨意濫捕，就連理應係避風港嘅屋企，亦都因為社會嘅矛盾而不得安寧嘅時候，周圍都唔能夠信任嘅時候，市民可以喺邊度釋放壓力？可以喺邊度揾到聆聽者呢？第三，市民對政府嘅唔信任，令到坊間流傳住好多唔同嘅言論，而政府只係靠記者會嘅言論試圖蒙混過去，從來都冇正面回應或者提供實質嘅證據去澄清呢啲嘅傳聞。咁樣只會令到民間嘅恐懼同埋無力感加劇，最終釀成民眾唔願意見到嘅慘劇。第四，面對警暴同埋濫捕，市民已經唔能夠再相信政府幫到佢哋。喺社運爆發之前，有幾多人會諗到自己竟然係會被拘捕啊？ 仲要擔心被拘捕之後會俾警察施暴。第五，即使係冇尋死嘅念頭，作為有良知嘅香港人，每日見到有人為香港嘅命運而放棄自己嘅前途，甚至犧牲咗性命，有幾多人係因為呢啲新聞而哭泣？有幾多個晚上係瞓唔着覺？第六，社運帶出嚟嘅無力感，好多時只係一個觸發點。當我哋深入了解之後，會發現其實佢哋背後潛藏住好多唔同嘅問題，只係以前佢冇爆發出嚟，亦都冇人發現得到。手足同埋社工自發去揾人，而林鄭月娥竟然話已經動員非政府機構提供輔導服務，期望盡量減低現時社會瀰漫嘅負面情緒。阿林鄭月娥，社福界唔係你動員㗎。喺6月開始嘅時候，無論係民間自發定係社福機構，喺你聲稱動員我哋之前，良知已經驅使我哋出嚟互相幫忙。社會運動持續，政府責無旁貸，口口聲聲話要對話，要解決社會嘅問題。但係喺呢個艱難嘅時刻，政府除咗將警權推至無限大，企圖消滅意見之外，有冇提供過任何嘅支援呢？當在地嘅服務都疲於奔命，我哋選擇犧牲休息嘅時間去做緊急嘅支援。面對住支援嘅服務供不應求，政府又提供過啲咩嘅措施去解決呢個問題？相反，政府同埋警隊不斷加深社會嘅撕裂，呢個正正就係市民承受巨大精神壓力嘅元兇，將香港人推向情緒瀕臨崩潰嘅邊緣。最後，我哋想寄語各位，呢個時間係艱難嘅，好多謝喺呢幾個月一路幫手同埋付出嘅咁多位手足。我哋明白到對抗無恥嘅極權係令到人非常之疲累，亦都好無力。容讓自己有軟弱嘅時間都係一種堅強。攰嘅時候休息一下，壓力大嘅時候揾人傾下偈。雖然政府係萬惡而且不可信，但係香港仍然有好多善良有良知嘅耳朵。或者問題唔能夠即刻解決，但係請你俾我哋為你分擔一下壓力。
Testing. I will now recap the speaker's speech in English. We are from a citizen-led suicide prevention squad, as a team of volunteers and social workers who came together after a spontaneous mass-scale rescue operation. They deem it necessary to form an official team that taken on this work in a society in which the people are suffering from an unspoken emotional abuse by our own government and prevent further tragedies. More than 500 cases have been processed since the establishment in July, 30% of which involve are classified as immediate crises, whereas others are cases of missing person and cases in which the victims indicated suicidal thoughts or needs for support. The demographic encompasses youth as 11 years old and adult up to the age of 50. The number of calls for help usually peak a day or two after large-scale protests. The record is 10 within a single day. Only within 4 months' time, there are already around 10 cases who attempted suicide more than once. The worst case has attempted even more, for 5 times. This shows that there are cases suffering from long-term mental health problems. Among 80% of the cases, the reason for suicide attempts is a sense of hopelessness with the future of Hong Kong under its current regime. Dissonance with family is also another reason. Victims often cite to have been forced out of their own homes. One memorable case is of a missing person whose family was thoroughly distressed when the police practically dismissed their report and never followed up. When the missing person was eventually discovered being detained in the mainland, it was volunteer social worker who had accompanied the person's family until they saw the loved one home safe and sound. The team is infuriated by the government's dismissive attitude towards human lives. The Hong Kong police force has shown itself to be incompetent in handling cases of missing persons. After all, the police force itself is suspected of being involved in multiple cases of framed suicides. Many citizens thus turn to grassroots organizations like us to retrieve the lost loved one. Another guest speaker joined the organization on the 2nd of September and immediately started helping out in the late night cases. There were 4 to 5 cases of suicide attempts that night. They were extremely short of hands and had already deployed all resources possible. And so some cases were attended to by ordinary civilians who had stand in the face of human life on the edge. On the same day at 5 p.m., a young protester was seen on the riverbank. He was a dedicated protester and had made good friends and a team with other fellow protesters. He was despairing over a teammate who had gone missing after arrest. He was conceived that his friend had died and was determined to avenge his friend and make the police pay the price before the police took his life. In the meantime, he, for one, refused to go back to his family due to the political disagreement. He had spent all his money on the resistance movement and was living on donations. After a lengthy counseling session by the colleagues, they accompanied him home. The poignant moral of this true story is one that reflects the twistedness of our current society, of it being one in which our young people are lucky if their families don't kick them out, and one in which they are driven so desperately, distraught that they would rather end their lives. The cases above are only the tip of the iceberg. In reality, the whole picture consists of helplessness, emotional breakdowns after a long period of repression, becoming disconnected with one's family, the spreading fear from rumored deaths, and the imminence of arbitrary arrest and torture, and the despair and countless sleepless, teary nights from reading about sufferings and sacrifices of our fellow people every day. They express their contempt towards Carol Lam's discourse of having mobilized the social work sector to suppress the collective low mood that currently plagues Hong Kong, and asserted that the social workers are not under her command. Before her non-existent mobilization, Hong Kongers have long begun looking out for each other even since June. Whilst volunteers are working themselves to the ground trying to save lives. The authorities have, in contrast, done nothing but endowed the police force with infinite power to exterminate dissidents. This is the one and only root cause of the current mental health epidemic. In the end, they are sure that they understand how tiring and debilitating it is to fight against the despicable regime, but that it is a type of strength to submit to that fact that we are all just humans, and accept that the fact not all problems have an immediate solution. Come to us if you need a kind shoulder. This is what they wish the audience would take home tonight. Thank you.
咁最後就由民記發言人分享其他報告同埋總結啦。And finally, more figures showcase and a summary from us.
咁由兩方嘉賓嘅發言可以見到，警方嚴重濫權濫捕嘅情況，為香港人帶嚟咗不可磨滅嘅生理同埋心理影響。同時，我哋亦都代為公佈一份收錄警隊懷疑濫權個案嘅報告。呢份報告呢係由一群嚟自唔同專業界別嘅香港人自發組織撰寫而成。報告以公開資料客觀咁分析過去4個月嚟上千條嘅新聞片段， 記錄咗6月至今多過350宗警隊懷疑濫權嘅個案。以下係報告內容嘅摘要。由6月開始，有起碼145次警隊喺行動之中違反使用武力守則，另外最少84次有意阻撓傳媒嘅採訪工作，喺鏡頭前面執行職務但係唔出示委任證起碼20次。其他涉嫌違例嘅例子包括拖延救護車將病人送往醫院或者診所，違反警方嘅拘捕原則，唔禮貌對待市民同埋議員等等，總數多達200幾個有記錄嘅個案。我哋相信報告現時所披露嘅只係屬於冰山一角，而警務人員喺執勤時候嘅法定權力亦都相當廣泛，即使喺執法嘅時候涉嫌濫用職權甚至乎違法，事後市民亦都難以由正常嘅法律途徑去予以追究。加上現有嘅投訴機制存在漏洞，警察投訴科唔獨立於警隊，自己人查自己人，監警會職能有限，唔能夠主動傳召證人盤問，而且過去調查大型事件嘅往績根本都唔理想。即使我哋見到部分嘅警察同埋佢背後為佢撐腰嘅政府對於規例法律而家已經視若無睹，但我哋要提醒大家一定唔可以因為疲倦而麻木，對不公義習以為常，反而更加要了解自身嘅權利所受嘅侵犯同埋制度嘅不足，以一切可行嘅辦法去彰顯公義。雖然5大訴求之一係成立獨立調查委員會，但我哋認為現時成立委員會嘅時機已經錯失咗，亦都唔足以由根本去解決警隊嘅大規模濫權問題。警隊必須要喺內部作出徹底嘅整頓，監警部門必須要獨立於警隊之外，並要賦予足夠嘅權力去徹底調查違反紀律、違紀違法嘅行為。問題嘅症結呢係在於政制，因此5大訴求包括推行全民雙普選係缺一不可嘅。最後，我哋喺呢度強烈呼籲掌握更多資料嘅媒體同埋新聞工作者，可以就有關嘅課題作出更深入嘅調查，去解開疑團。另外，除咗啱啱以上嘅報告同埋嘉賓分享之外，我哋亦都發現有關地下醫療嘅數據值得關注。民間記者會分別攞到部分義診數據，當中喺西醫界別有僅僅成立3週嘅地下診所已經處理咗合共106宗嘅個案，亦即係平均每日處理5宗求助。全部個案當中有6宗屬於危急或者緊急程度，49宗需要專科或者專職醫生評估或者治療。10歲至到20歲佔39人，41宗同警暴有關係，合共19宗需要轉介到社工、精神科同埋臨床心理學家。身心皆受創嘅有4個百分比。而喺中醫界別方面，其中有50名醫師合作嘅國難中醫，由9月10號起至今已經合共診咗6000個門診，當中有300宗骨科、5700宗左右內傷，60宗係屬於子彈傷，而1000宗係經血問題，3000宗同肺部有關，例如咳嗽、氣促，其他係輻射、瘀傷同埋皮膚問題等等。今日香港面對嘅並唔係典型嘅人道危機，除咗因為警暴引致嘅身體創傷之外，心理創傷嘅問題都急需正視。眼見香港喺幾個月之間由國際都市崩壞成為警察國家，呢種認知同埋現實嘅落差本身已經造成心理壓力，而港共政府以散佈恐懼嚟維穩嘅政策，亦都切切實實咁對制度施暴，為求嚇怕香港人，令到香港人收聲返屋企。每一次大型遊行集會之前，魔警都會進行大搜捕。喺11國殤之前，濫捕多名議員同埋社運人士。喺遊行集會開始之前，就喺集合點列陣威嚇。而喺活動結束之後，唔理告唔告都入，總之拉咗先算嘅濫捕，用拘留同埋司法程序嚟嚇香港人。繼用緊急法實行反蒙面法之後，再有特別保護警察嘅防起底禁制令。琴日更加頒咗臨時禁制令，禁止任何人喺網上平台，包括連登同埋 Telegram 發布任何言論，威脅使用暴力或者使用暴力及毀壞財物，企圖製造更大嘅白色恐怖同埋打壓。當港共政府同埋警隊 正正令到香港人嘅精神健康危在旦夕，係呢成個問題嘅元兇嘅時候，當佢哋繼續施以各種手段企圖滅聲，而唔係提供合適支援嘅時候，香港人必須要自救，持續發聲，嚟獲得更多嘅國際關注。雖然原有嘅11月2號求援國際嘅集會俾警方以無理原因反對，但係大會已經公布最新安排，超過100位區議會候選人將會喺明日下午3時喺維園舉辦合法嘅選舉聚會。及後市民亦都可以前往中環出席2個分別已經獲得不反對通知書嘅集會，再次呈現過百萬人上街嘅場面。當日全球亦都會有48個城市舉辦遊行聲援香港，靈活嘅香港人會繼續 be water。雖然呢5個月我哋受傷，我哋痛心，但我哋仍然無忘初衷。我哋會幫已經離開咗嘅手足繼續行落去，直至到5大訴求全部落實，直至到光復香港。
From our guest testimonies, it is as clear as day that the double whammy of the police abuse of power as well as brutal force has inflicted irreparable physical and emotional damage on the people of Hong Kong. We would also like to publicize the report written and edited by a group of volunteers from various professional fields. It aims to objectively analyze the police legal statutory power and record over 350 suspected cases of abuse, police brutality based on open sources and thousands of media footages in the past 4 months. Here is a summary of the findings. Over 200 cases of police misconduct have been recorded since June. This figure includes over 145 cases of violations of the guideline for the use of force, at least 84 cases of deliberate hindrance to press freedom, more than 20 cases of frontline officers refusing to display the warrant cards in front of the camera, and various other incidents of suspected violation of code such as delaying admissions of patients into hospital or clinics, unlawful arrests, and the mistreatment of civilians and legislators. We believe that these documented cases are just the tip of the iceberg. According to the current law, the statutory power enjoyed by the police officers while on duty is expensive. Even if officers are suspected of abusing the powers or breaching the law, it is extremely difficult for the public to seek redress after the fact through normal legal channels. The current complaint mechanism is full of loopholes. Complaint against police force is not independent of the HKPF. It is police investigating police. The Independent Police Complaint Council lacks statutory power. It cannot summon witness for cross-examination and has a poor track record of investigating major incidents. The author would like to remind us that even amid of the prevailing lawlessness, we must not succumb to fatigue and become numb to the flagrant disregard of laws and regulations. We must stay vigilant to the infringement of our rights and seek to understand the deficiencies of our system. They believe that the time to form an independent investigative committee has passed and no longer enough to fundamentally resolve the issue of abuse of police powers. A deep internal reconstructing of a Hong Kong police force needs to take place, and the department overseeing the police must be granted with sufficient regulatory powers to investigate suspected police violation in depth as well as to operate independently of the police force. Since the root of the troubles lies in the political system, all 5 demands must be met. We would hereby like to urge those, especially members of the press, who have access to greater wealth of information than we do, to inquire into the topic further and to uncover more of the truth. Apart from the aforementioned reports and sharing from our guests, we have obtained alarming figures on alternative underground medical services, which demand attention. First, we shall address free medical consultation offered by volunteer clinics in Western medicine. One of the volunteer clinics, having only been established for 3 weeks, has already treated 106 cases. That is an average 5 cases per day. Within these 106 cases, 6 were classified as critical and require immediate medical attention. 49 require specialist medical treatment. 39 patients were aged between 10 to 20. 41 cases were related to police brutality. 19 cases warranted referrals to psychiatrists, clinical psychologists, or social workers, 4% of which includes cases of trauma. Next, turn to our attention to volunteer clinics in Chinese medicine. One volunteer clinic, Fine CMAC, operating in cooperation by 50 Chinese medicine practitioners, has already handled 6,000 patients since the 10th of September, including 300 cases of bone injury, 5,700 cases of internal injuries, 60 cases of gun wounds, 1,000 cases of menstrual problems, 3,000 cases of pneumonic problems such as shortness of breath, and other cases of various problems, including diarrhea, bruises, and skin disorders. What Hong Kongers are facing today is not a typical humanitarian crisis. Besides bodily wounds caused by the police brutality, psychological trauma must also be addressed as a matter of urgency, as we witness Hong Kong descending from an international metropolis into police state. Hong Kongers are experiencing cognitive dissonance at the current state of Hong Kong. At the same time, the Hong Kong Communist government, as a matter of policy, is using fear as a tool to maintain its social order, exerting its institutional violence upon our civil society. To carry out its mission to intimidate Hong Kongers into remaining silent and into not standing up before every mass demonstration. First, the Hong Kong police force will conduct a mass arrest of activists to deter masses from taking to the streets. Then the police will assemble at rally point to intimidate protesters. Once they have taken to the streets, then the police will start arbitrary arrests, regardless of whether evidence for prosecution exists. The nuisance protesters with detention and judiciary procedures. After the usage of emergency laws to enact the anti-mass law, next we had the anti-identification injunction to exceptionally privilege the police. And now we have the anti-incitement injunction forbidding any speech offline or online in threat of violence or vandalism. In the Hong Kong government's attempt for even greater white terror and political suppression, when the Hong Kong communist regime and the Hong Kong police force have become the root cause for Hong Kong's mental health crisis, when they continue to use various tactics to silence Hong Kongers, instead of providing support that is appropriate, Hong Kongers must save themselves and continue to voice out in order to gain more international support. Even though the planned on the 2nd of November rally for international support has been unreasonably disapproved by the police, the organizers has made a rearrangement. More of the 100 proposed district councillors will legally campaign in Victoria Park, and afterwards, citizens may proceed to Central to attend 2 more rallies, each of which has already received a notice of no objection. Hong Kongers will recreate the scenes of million-strong protests, while on the same day, 48 cities worldwide will be holding rallies to support Hong Kong. The resilient Hong Kong people will continue to be water, and there's no suppression that will murder Hong Kongers' determination with our 5 demands. Thank you.
多謝發言人。咁跟住落嚟就會去到問答環節嘅，因為時間有限，所以請每間報館問不多於2條問題。發問之前報一報自己邊一間報館。And we'll now have the Q&A section of the day. Due to limited time that we have, we'd like to ask each of the journalists to ask no more than 2 questions at a time. And please give us the name of the press at a time. Thank you.
唔該。商台好簡單嘅問題，都想問翻話，即係經歷過警方濫捕嗰位受害人，可唔可以講多少少？其實當其時個情況，即係到底警方對你驅趕嘅時候，嗰個濫捕嗰個情況係點樣嘅咧？想知多啲 detail， 唔該。
關於警方濫捕嘅情況，其實我唔可以講更多嘅，因為係會可能會影響咗我自己本身自身嘅安全啦。咁佢係當日咧，佢係即係佢哋係因為醫護人員啦透露咗我嘅病情啦，然之後就再有警方咧就從嗰個咁樣嘅片面之詞同埋我當日嘅情況咧，佢就拘捕咗我。我淨係可以講咁多啫，唔該。
Thanks, Richard from RTHK. You mentioned that PTSD in Hong Kong is mostly linked to sort of natural disasters and sentinel events. So do local psychiatrists actually have the proper training and ability to treat people with these sort of problems? And secondly, in terms of sort of the support networks, are they also at breaking point because of the widespread mental crisis in Hong Kong?
Okay, so thank you for your question from RTHK, right? Okay, so you mentioned that so local psychiatrists, are they really trained to treat PTSD cases? As we said, that is much more related to natural disaster or say individual sexual assaults or domestic violence, etc. So they are indeed trained to deal with PTSD cases. So PTSD in itself is quite a common diagnosis in most mental health systems. But in Hong Kong, as we said, it is basically related to domestic violence cases, individual cases of sexual assaults, or say accidents, say car accidents or say the fire accidents, etc. So seldom have we seen or investigated PTSD cases in the framework of police brutality. And also, as you said, is the mental health system is at a breaking point. So I think it is rather clear that the mental health systems in Hong Kong are pretty much insufficient, I would say, compared to international standards. And it's not a new thing. It has been there for many years. So, but we have only volunteers to rely on right now. So I think, is there any supplementary supplements from our volunteers? No. Okay. Yeah, I think it's pretty much what we have right now. Oh.
蘋果嘅想問翻咧，即係頭先唔開心頭先即係你話不便透露太多啦，但係會唔會可以講翻即係被捕嘅時候，其實係喺公立醫院抑或係私家醫院㗎？係咪都唔方便講？同埋咧警方即係喺拘捕你嘅時候，即係一個正常嘅一個執法，即係完全冇使用任何暴力啊？因為其實你認為佢係當中有使用到一啲不適當嘅武力去叫處理你咧？即係我唔知你方便透露。咁另外咧，想問翻民記嘅代表啦，即係見到即係唔少嘅抗爭人士嗰個嘅焦慮嘅情況都相當之嚴重啦。咁近期其實亦都有即係有啲網上嘅言論就覺得好似少咗人出嚟抗爭喎，即係就算可能和平嘅遊行都少咗人嚟，會唔會係因為可能過分焦慮或者係抑鬱咁，所以令到啲人卻步出咗嚟咧？抑或係純粹係一個運動嘅熱情期已經過去，你哋又點睇咧？唔該晒。
可以講佢哋有冇有啲乜嘢嘅濫捕嗰啲嘢？咁其實佢哋就冇用過暴力啦，咁係正常程序咁樣去將我拘捕，即係可以講咁多。Thank you。
係，另外就回應翻記者那條問題啦，就關於最近人數少咗，覺得係咩原因同埋有咩睇法啊？咁首先想回應嘅係 如果係淨係睇近呢幾日，譬如係睇琴日蘭桂坊啦，可能你會覺得近呢期嘅活動人數少咗。但我想強調第一點係喺過往一直就無論係100萬、200萬人開始啦，逢親係有大型遊行、大型集會嘅嗰個星期，如果之前嘅閒日咧有活動嘅時候咧，相對地人數係少啲嘅，過往都係咁樣嘅。而我哋不妨睇下究竟聽日會唔會有好多人出嚟。另一樣嘢咧就係喺最近期嘅活動嘅模式亦都相對地唔同咗。譬如而家我哋會有5區開花啦，有即係多區開花咁，人數相對地以前咧可能係分散咗，都會有大家覺得人數少咗嘅一個感覺。但係實際上究竟由譬如立咗反蒙面法開始，結果遮打嗰一日仍然有咁多人願意戴住口罩出席啦。對於近期嘅一啲遊行活動，即使譬如10月20號嗰次民陣俾人反對咗，咁到之後都仍有咁多人願意出席，係咪人數真係少咗？係咪冇人再願意出嚟抗爭？喺熱情期已經叫過咗呢？我唔覺得香港人係咁樣嘅，所以我相信無論係聽日第二日活動咧，香港人都仍然係同以前嘅口號一樣，5大訴求缺一不可。
仲有冇記者有問題？
想問下東方日報嘅，想問下頭先嗰個關於地下醫療報告嗰個情況。你提到話嗰超過6000宗嗰個係有冇講話係幾時開始接收出嚟嗰個？定係即幾多月開始嘅？同埋6000宗係中醫及西醫啊，定係淨係中醫？因為頭先個 PowerPoint 度就淨係寫中醫嗰個義診就6000宗咁樣。係得。
係咁，首先回應咗你第二條問題先。第二條問題係關於嗰6000宗嘅數字嘅。咁6000宗都係講緊中醫，即係頭先講國難中醫嘅一部分。西醫係分開計算，應該有係500幾宗，如果我冇記錯嘅話。多過100。哦，多過100宗，唔好意思。係。另外第一條問題可唔可以重複多一次啊？唔好意思。你問咗2條㗎嘛？頭先另外第一部分
由幾時開始？哦，嗰個數據我哋之後俾翻你啊，我哋之後俾翻個實際開始計算嘅日期俾你。唔該晒。
唔該，記者提問。
仲有冇其他記者發問 ？Any more questions？ 好，咁如果冇嘅話，今日記者會就到呢度為止啦。多謝大家嚟到今次嘅記者會，同埋多謝大家收睇直播。Thank you for coming today. So this is the end of our press conference today. Thank you.